Stanford University.
Welcome to Lecture 12, iPhone Application Development. We're going to be talking about address book today, or as our guest lecturer today, Alex, likes to put it, putting people in your iPhone application. A couple quick announcements first, though, the usual stuff. Presence 3 is due tomorrow at midnight. So if you have any questions, especially with, as far as threading goes, all the NS operation stuff, that can be kind of tricky. So let us know if you ever have any problems. And definitely be sure, any place where your app may be doing, some lengthy operation that involves the network or some expensive work, you want to be doing that on a background thread, preferably with an NS operation. So there are some cases that we specifically call out in the assignment. If there's any other things that your app is doing that might warrant an NS operation, go ahead and do it as well there. And then Presence 4 will be posted on the website probably tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that. One other announcement is final project proposals are due today. We didn't really give a time, but we'd like to have them in hand today. So if you're encountering any issues, you're sitting there and you still haven't figured out what you want to do for your final project or anything like that, let us know. We've actually had a lot of incoming, emails from folks at the university who want to work with, a student in this class to make an iPhone app for whatever. Had a lot of different sort of things come in. So if you're in search of an idea, let us know, and maybe we can hook you up with somebody. If there's any other ambiguities or questions, let us know. You had a question?
Do you have a time frame for when you're giving feedback?
The question was, is there a time frame for when we're going to be giving feedback? I don't think we have a deadline, but we're going to be trying to get back to you in the next day or two so that you can, sort of go wild and start working on your app. Don't necessarily assume that no response means thumbs up, but we will aspire to not leave you hanging for more than a day or two before getting back with some word. Yeah, we'll be getting back to you. So just shoot us an email, and even if the email is saying, "Hey, I'm really freaking out. I just had a bunch of midterms and I have no idea what's going on," it's better to get that to us than just no email. We want to know where everyone stands. And with that, I'd like to introduce Alex Abus. He's an iPhone software engineer and knows all about address book as well as a bunch of other stuff. So please give him your, whatever it is that you give me an Al every week.
More.
Yeah,
better.
applause, sure.
Good afternoon. So yeah, Alex Abus, that's me. And today we're going to cover mostly the address book APIs. And we're going to also cover some things about CoreFoundation, which are useful to know to understand some of the address book APIs. The way we're going to cover those address book APIs through two main examples. One that could remind you a little bit of that assignment, the presence assignment, maybe just a tiny bit. And the second one is a somewhat simpler example of some other things you might want to do with address book in your own applications. So yes, putting context in your applications. We're actually going to do just that with the first demo. I like to do the first demo after 20 seconds. So there, we have a little sample application. This is essentially just a navigation controller-based app. When I run it, this is what you see, beautiful, empty navigation controller. So looking at the code, this is all we do. We create a UI navigation controller. It's all created in code just for simplicity in here, to be concise. So we create the navigation controller, add it as a subview of the window, and that's about it. So in this app, we're actually going to add a person. So I'm cheating, and I'm magically typing super fast. So we have this view controller called the AB person view controller that we're going to create. I'm going to go over the code fairly quickly because we're going to dive into more detail later. I just wanted to show you that it's actually fairly simple. We're creating a view controller and apparently reallocating the navigation controller, which makes no sense. So I'm going to delete the first line. There we go. The navigation controller gets allocated here with its root view controller being the person view controller. And then we release the person view controller because we don't need it anymore. The next thing we do is actually create a person. Again, I'm going to gloss over most of that code, but it's a whole 3 lines of code in here. 4, 5, 5. When I learn to count, it's 5 lines. So we set a first name, it's going to be John. A last name, it's going to be Appleseed. Set that person on the person view controller and release the person. With that, we're going to run it. Yes. And what we see here is now a nice little card view with a background, an image, the name, a title. It's kind of cute, but it doesn't really do much. So we're going to add one more bit in here, one little line. We're going to allow editing on the person view controller. And when I run this, I get this little button at the top right. And when I press it, I get more fields. And you're probably familiar with those from the address book, the contacts application, or the phone application. And what you get here is actually the entire editing UI from address book. So you can also pick images, you can change the name, change the ringtone, add extra fields, add an address, change the country, etc. You get this entire UI that's essentially the whole UI from address book by just, what was it? 8, 10 lines of code. So that's it. That was just to show you that it's actually fairly simple to add address book to your application. So on that note, let's go back to slides. What do we see? Again, to add those contacts, to add pretty much the entire UI that address book offers on the phone, you have, 8 lines of code. You need to create a person that you're going to be presenting, create a view controller, and the address book framework provides one for you, and you need to push that view controller on the navigation stack. And that's about all you need to do, and you get a fairly deep, complex hierarchy. All right, as you might have noticed in the code, there were some bits in C, so we're actually going to talk about this framework called CoreFoundation. It's one of the fairly low-level frameworks on the phone as well as on Mac OS X, and it's closely related to this other framework called Foundation. CoreFoundation is essentially a C version of Foundation. Most of the classes are available in both. Like CF Dictionary Ref is equivalent to the NS Dictionary you're going to find in Foundation. CF String Ref, equivalent to NS String, etc., etc. It uses the same memory management technique. So wherever you'd call retain, the Objective-C message retain, you're going to call a very similar function called CF retain. Same with release, you're going to call CF release. Again, that's all pure C. Address book, as it turns out, is sort of separate into two different frameworks. There's the low-level C-based address book framework, as well as a higher-level Objective-C framework for everything that's relating to the UI. So address book UI framework is Objective-C. But in this case, it's important to know a bit about Foundation because the address book framework is pure C, using CoreFoundation types everywhere. In addition, one extra thing about the CoreFoundation framework, one extra little tip here. Oftentimes you'll find functions in CoreFoundation that are called create something, CF array create, CF string create, etc. All those mean that the object you get back has a retain count of 1. So you will need to release. It's exactly like when you do copy. And there are a number of functions in CoreFoundation that are copy something that will also return you an object that has a retain count incremented by 1. AB address book create is a good example, but you also find CF string create, mutable copy, CF string create, CF array create, etc. One other neat little feature of the CoreFoundation framework, especially when it relates to Foundation, is that most of the objects you find, I think all of the objects you find in there, are toll-free bridged. What that means is that you can essentially use one for the other. So when you get a CF string or CF array, for example, this API from address book that we'll talk about later will return you a CF array ref. You can actually use that as you would use any NS array. One thing that's important to note is that you get a CF array ref that's an opaque type, and that's equivalent to NS array star. So everything that ends in ref in CoreFoundation terms is a pointer to an object. So it's an NS array star. In this particular case, we're getting a CF array ref from the address book and then casting it to an NS array star and just calling Objective-C messages on it. And that's all you really need to do. It's very practical. Yeah.
I'm confused.
So the toll-free bridging is the fact that if you see in the code, sorry, we're not quite sure what's going on and what is the toll-free bridging. So the toll-free bridging is the fact that you can get a CF array ref in the first line of code. And the second line, you're actually calling an Objective-C method on that CF array ref. You're casting that CF array ref array to an NS array star and using it as if it was an Objective-C object instance. Does that make sense? That's what we call the toll-free bridging between the sort of pure C world and the Objective-C world.
You're trying to bridge C and C, or
And Objective-C.
using specialized.
Right. Foundation and CoreFoundation know how to deal with those objects, and you can pass messages, send messages to CF objects.
And that's because address book is in C.
That's sort of independent of address book. It's CoreFoundation and Foundation. The address book framework being in C uses the same conventions as CoreFoundation. Does that make sense?
Is there a performance hit when you're trying to convert between the two? Should we worry about it?
Is there a performance hit? It's not exactly free. That having been said, it's going to be really, really small compared to anything else you're going to do in your application. So
So we can just use them interchangeably?
yes. I wouldn't worry too much about that particular cost to it until it actually shows up in samples and things like that. Any other question? The question was, is it a direct cast or is something else going on? The Objective-C runtime will figure it out and dispatch the messages properly. So there is a little bit of voodoo and magic going on behind the scenes. But Evan wants to add something.
As I like to do. One thing you may have noticed in the what a tool assignment back towards the beginning of the quarter, when you were actually printing out the class name of some objects like strings, you'll notice you created and allocated, say, an NS string. And when you printed out the actual name of the class, it was actually, what is it,
CF, NS, string,
CF string ref. It's
something.
actually, when you're creating either of these, say a CF string ref or an NS string star, under the hood, it's this sort of shared, the implementation is shared between CoreFoundation and Foundation. That's why in any code that expects an NS string star, you can pass a CF string ref and vice versa. So.
Is there like a key function that does the bridging?
No, there's no key function that does the bridging. The key in this slide is essentially this NS log line or this NS mutable array, mutable copy line, where you can see that the CF array ref is just being cast to an NS array star. So those are completely interchangeable. So any function that expects a CF array ref can also take an NS array, cast to a CF array ref. Does that make sense? So the question was, why is address book in C rather than Objective-C, or why isn't everything Objective-C? There are some historical reasons for it that I'm not going to get into right now, but some applications, some lower level applications don't want to use Objective-C. There's also a small overhead to Objective-C, so we wanted something really lean and quick for the address book framework, so it's all pure C and very concise, especially as far as memory footprint. There's a slight overhead to having lots of NS objects around.
Pretty much everything at the core services level is C.
Right. Everything that's sort of low level, the core services level, like Evan put it, is pure C. It's not so relevant for applications, sort of high level applications, but we also use it in sort of some lower level services. All right. So CoreFoundation and null. There's one thing that's a little different between Foundation and CoreFoundation. It's null. None of the CF functions check for null. So do not pass null to any of the CF functions. That means if you do pass CF retain null, we'll crash immediately. You'll know very quickly. So before you call anything, any of the CF functions with a particular object, check that it's not null. Like in that great example. And yes, toll-free bridging makes things easier, especially when you're dealing with an API like address book that is C, and then you're passing it around in Objective-C calls. You'll also find that some functions are available in CoreFoundation. Some are easier to use in the Foundation side of things. So you can pick and choose, essentially. There. That's actually a lot easier to write in Objective-C at the foundation level than it is in CF. The functions tend to be a little bigger in CF. Does that make sense? If you set an object, so the question is, if you set an object to nil and then send it to CoreFoundation, you will most likely crash once you call any CF function with that object. And when I say most likely, you will crash. There's no doubt. All right, so now let's get back on address book. Go a little beyond that little hello world example. So what we're going to look at today is sort of the social networking website example. What if you have people on the web, say anything like Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter? Oh, I didn't say it. So you have people on the web. You have a social networking website. You also likely, you and your users, have contacts and people on their iPhone. Or not, but usually they do. You want to reconcile those two and sort of present a list of the people that were on the web, the people that were in your address book, and use the data from both places to display to a user. So what do we need to do in order to do that? The first step is usually to download those people from your web service, I imagine, from your social networking website. Then, we really want to reconcile those two. So we're going to have to search your local address book, the address book on the phone, and figure out what contacts are there. Maybe they match what you just downloaded. Then we want to actually update those contacts that are on the phone with information we might get from the web service. And then finally display to the user, because if you're not displaying anything, it's not really interesting. So let's go to step one. As you might notice, I skipped the whole download part. You've talked about that earlier. So step one is really step two, but we can just say it's zero-based and it will be fine. So step one, how do we actually get the people from the address book? There are two simple functions. In this case, AB address book create, and then this function you might remember from a few slides ago, AB address book copy people with name. So these are the two functions you need in order to get to the address book and then search people. So let's take a closer look at that first line, this AB address book thing. This is your main entry point into the address book database. This AB address book ref object. I'm going to talk about objects even though this is technically just a C type, but it'll behave as an object. And it's also a CoreFoundation type, so everything CF retain, CF release. You can cast it to an ID and call retain and release on it. Objective-C retain and release on it. So this address book instance will give you access to the people. It also, you might notice in here that we're calling AB address book create. What this implies that this creates a new instance of this AB address book ref object. While you can create multiple instances, and we'll see some cases of that and reasons why you would want to do that, all those instances access the same database. So it's always your entry point to the user's contacts. You're not creating multiple databases all over the place. All right, so that was the first line of it. You have this address book reference. Now we need to actually do something with it. We want to search for people. So let's take a look at the people. What are people on the phone? We have this other class called AB record ref. And it represents the people. You can see on the left, a card as you would see it on the phone. And as you can notice, it has a number of properties. Any record, address book record, is essentially a collection of property values. In this case, we have first name, last name, job title, an image, some phone numbers, etc., etc. So let's take a look at those properties. And If anybody has any questions, feel free to interrupt me as I go. So the properties. All those properties you have in the address book, I've mentioned a few, like the image, the names, the birthday, and a bunch of other. All those are CF types. So you have strings for the names. You have dates for a birthday, for example. You also have more complex data, like a CF data or NS data, if you want, for the image, as well as dictionaries. Dictionaries typically we use for addresses. Addresses are sort of this complex structure of you have a country, you have a zip code, you have an address, et cetera, et cetera. So we use dictionaries for those. Some of those properties, including the address, phone numbers as well, have more than just one. You don't have just one phone number. Usually, we'll possibly have a home number for those who still have a landline, a work number, 4 or 5 iPhones, etc. So you have a few phone numbers, a few email addresses possibly, etc. So all those can have multiple entries. Finally, if you want the entire list of all the properties available in address book, you can look at the header or the documentation. They're all there. So let's take a look dig even deeper into those properties. The first is the single value property. I mentioned a few times now. First name, last name, etc., birthday. All CoreFoundation types. Again, retain it, release it, as you should. In order to retrieve those values, there's a function called abrecord copy value. And it looks like this when you call it. In this case, we're getting the first name from the person. And you just abrecord copy value, pass in the person, and pass in the name of the property. Again, those are all defined in abperson.h. What you get back, in this case, is a CF string ref. Again, this is abrecord copy value, so release it once you've done using it. The flip side of that one is abrecord set value, if you want to update the first name. Or in this case, if you want to update the birthday. In this case, we create a CF date ref. As you can see, we use CF date create. You could also use NS date in order to create it. And the NS date can be cast to a CF date ref. And abrecord set value, pass in the person, the name of the property, and a date. The error is in case we couldn't set it for one reason or another. For example, some particular backend services, Exchange doesn't support necessarily all the properties. So there could be something wrong. You get an error back. Any questions? Everyone's lost. Excellent. All right. I've mentioned earlier that there were more than just single value properties. You also have those multi-values. How does this work? Well, you have a beautiful diagram. Get it? OK. So the multi-values, the phone numbers, the emails, the URLs, there are a few others. And that's, again, all in the documentation or in the headers. To get those, it works essentially the same way as the single values. You still call the same functions, abrecord copy value, abrecord set value. Except instead of getting a CF string, you get this object called AB multi-value. The AB multi-value is actually a container for values and labels. And it will look something like this beautiful diagram. In this case, we have the phone number property. And it has 3 phone numbers, a home phone number and actually 2 home phone numbers and a work. As you can see, each one of those has both a label and a value. The labels aren't keys in the sense that you can have as many home numbers as you want. Technically, values aren't keys either, so you can have 4 times the same one if you really want. So that's the multi-value. Let's take a look at the different functions that are available on the multi-value. I mentioned it's a property, so it's a container, so you need a count. And this is what it looks like. AB multi-value get count gets you a CF index. It's just a CF defined for essentially what is an integer. Next one, to actually get the value, you AB multi-value copy value at index. It's a bit of a mouthful. And you'll get a CF type ref. This is where you're going to get either your string, or your dictionary for a street address, or what else are you going to get? The CF date for dates, etc. The other thing is the label. It's a very similar function, AB multi-value copy label at index. It will get you, we have a number of predefined labels like home, work, other, cell phone, etc. And you can also put whatever you want in there. So what is the question was, what is the multi-value variable? The multi-value variable is what you got from, you remember a few slides ago, called AB record copy value. This is what you're going to get when you're calling AB record copy value on a phone property, for example. You're going to get back an AB multi-value ref. And then you can query that AB multi-value ref for the number of properties it's got, the number of entries it's got, as well as the individual values and labels. Does that make sense? Right. So the question was, what is the underlying implementation? I kind of want to say you don't really need to worry about it. It's essentially, a contiguous storage, or an array type thing. That's why you have indexed accessors into it. Does that make sense? Any other questions? All right. The last one I wanted to mention in the functions available in the AB multi-value is an identifier. You notice that the previous two functions are index-based. You can also get an identifier. What that identifier is for is to store, keep track of it. This is not supposed. This is the. It's also an integer, but it's not going to change if you reorder them or delete one. If you have 3, you delete the middle one, the identifier for the last one is still going to be the same thing. So it's handy when you want to keep track of a particular phone number, for example. All right. Back on our story. So I digressed and dug really deep in there. We've figured out all the pieces for searching, since we skipped downloading. And now we actually want to update. So you have those records that came from your web service, and you actually want to update the contact, a contact that you matched on the phone. In this case, in order to do the update, there are a few steps. You need to get any existing data you have in that contact, because you don't want to just blow it away. And then you need to mutate this data. Once you've created this mutable copy, I'll comment over the code in just a little bit. You need to add that value, set the multi-value ref back on the person, and then save the address book. So this is what it looks like in code. The first thing we do, you notice, is AB record copy value. We get this AB multi-value ref back. In this case, we're updating the URLs. Once you have this multi-value, AB multi-value create mutable copy. So the AB multi-value is not mutable by default, and it's for performance optimizations. So you need to actually create a copy of it that you can then mutate, modify. Once you have that, the mutable version of it, you just call this function, AB multi-value add value and label, pass in the new value you want, a label, and the last one is actually just an error parameter that I'm ignoring for the example. But you should always care about errors. Once you've mutated your multi-value ref, set it back on the person, and then save the address book. If you don't save the address book, you're going to lose it as you quit the application. All right, that's for updating. The last step was, anyone remembers? All right, everyone's asleep, that's okay. Display, yes, thank you. First row, awesome. So what do we do in order to display? We need to actually, once we have all those contacts that came from the web service and we're merged in with the contacts on the phone, we need to sort them and put them in order that makes sense rather than just their unique identifier in the database on the web. Not really an ordering users care about. So we need to sort them. Then we need to get a name for them and display them. So that seems fairly easy. 3 steps to step 3. So let's take a look at the first one, sorting. As I work more and more on address book, I notice that sorting incredibly complicated in a lot of languages. So trust me, you don't want to do it. We'll do it. What this involves is essentially, in this case, what you want to get is, typically you'll want to use the same ordering that the user has set on their phone, right? If you prefer to order your contacts by first name, then you want your app to actually also just order them by first name. So we're going to do that with this ab_person_get_sort ordering function that will return you the ordering. And then we have this other handy little function that compares two AB record ref and gives you what order they should be displayed in. This is what it looks like in code. We have an array of people. In this case, we've made a mutable array out of an array, etc. We've obtained it from somewhere. We create a range for it. This is part of how the CoreFoundation version of this function works. And then we get the sort ordering. The ab_person_get_sort ordering. You get back a sort ordering, which is this type, ab_person_sort ordering. And then you call CF_array sort values. And that will actually sort the array according to the sort ordering we passed in. The CF_array sort values is a CoreFoundation function. What it takes is the array, the range you actually want to sort, because you could actually want to just sort part of that array. And the third argument is a function pointer. ab_person_compare people by name is the actual function we're providing in the framework. Last one is important. It's the actual sort ordering. So pass in the sort ordering in there. If you really don't want to use what the user chooses, or if you have a separate preference for it or something, you can pass in your own sort ordering. But definitely pass a sort ordering in there. For those of you who don't want to use C, this is what it looks like in Objective-C. Again, CoreFoundation Foundation, you can bridge them, or they are bridged rather. So you can actually call people sort using function, pass in the same function, and again, pass the sort ordering as the context. That will sort your people. Any questions? Not quite. So the question is, how do we know when we can do this bridging? It's really up to the documentation at that point. It's really up to the implementation of the actual function. Everything that's in CoreFoundation will actually be bridged, so you can use one or the other. And then it's up to the frameworks to actually expose bridged objects. Do you want to add something? Clarify?
I can just add. So it's
You may.
it's not the methods themselves that you're casting in one language or the other. It's the objects. So NSArray and CFArray can be used interchangeably. So any of the methods you see defined on NSArray, you can call on a CFArray ref. And any of the methods you see for CFArray ref, you can call on an NSArray. Does that make sense? So you're not actually taking the CF method and calling that as Objective-C. You're using Objective-C methods on a CFArray object. I hope that makes sense.
So that is cast as an NSArray then, or is it implicitly cast as an NSArray of people?
Right. The question is it implicitly cast? Technically, that last line doesn't compile quite like that.
Yeah, you'll get
it
a
just
warning.
fits in nicely on the slide. You do need to do a little more casting than is actually written there. So you will need to cast that people to an NSArray star. And you will also, sadly, need to cast this crazy function pointer to something really long. But you'll find the something really long in the header for a sort using function on NSArray. If that makes sense. Yes, it would with all the cast, it would take 3 lines, sadly. All right, any other questions? All right, so sorting, that was it. Now getting the name. Also, there are really 2 main preferences in contacts on the phone. It's the sort ordering and the display ordering. Some people prefer to display last name first or first name last. So you also have a handy little function that will just do that for you. AB record copy composite name, you pass it a person, and we'll get you a beautiful string you can display on the screen. In this example, you have a person. AB record copy composite name, you get a string, that's the name, and you do something clever with it. If you want to do it in Objective-C, it looks exactly the same, except you're just casting more. But now you have an NS string star instead of CF string array. All right, so that was getting the name. Now displaying, we're actually going to do it. Well, I'm going to do it. You're going to watch. So let's go to Xcode and my little sample here. All right, so I've already built a few pieces of that application. As you can see, it's really exciting. It's a navigation controller with a UI table view controller in it that has a list of nobody. So it's really, really nice. The way it looks is essentially we have, as usual, the app delegate. In this case, it's all created in code to make it clear in the code. We have this social people table view controller. That's a subclass of UI table view controller. A navigation controller. And then we set our social people table view controller as its root view controller, etc. So this is the usual app delegate you'll find. Let's take a quick look at our social people table view controller. That's quite a few words. That's, as I said, a subclass of UI table view controller. It has an address book instance, a web service. This is this little class I'll show you in just a sec, and an array of people. This little web service is actually mostly hard-coded. I'm not giving away any of the code you probably already wrote. We just essentially have one function in here, which is the web people, and it returns 5 people: Anna, Paul, John, Antoine, and Adrien. So there we go. All right, now let's actually implement this thing. As I said, when we run it, we have nothing yet. So this is our UI table view controller subclass. It has a people method that's being used in the number of rows in section, as well as a few other things. So we're going to fill in this people method. The first thing we need to do, again, there's 3 steps, is to download the people. The web service encapsulates all the download. So we're going to get those web people from our web service and iterate over those. So we have downloaded them. It's all magical. Now we're going to search each person we get back from the web service inside the address book database. The way we do this, I'm going to close this, make a little more room. The way we do this is by calling this function I talked about earlier, ab address book copy people with name. And the address book, and since we're passing in, is the one we create in the init method. And what's interesting here is the full name. We're essentially just building a full name from the first name and last name. And then we're going to let address book search the database for the actual records matching that first name and last name. It will do a number of things in order to find. So if they're not complete names, it will also match them and do a number of fancy magical things. Not that fancy or magical, but do a number of things. So once we have those matches, or people that are in the local database that have the same first name, last name as the people on the web, we need to actually update them. So to do this, we're going to get a little AB record ref, and we're going to make sure we have some matches, because we could have people on the web service that we don't have in our address book. So we're going to make sure that there are some contacts in that, there are some web people in that array. And then, there are some AB record refs in that array. And then we're going to get it out of the array. You could have multiple matches for a particular first name, last name. So we're going to ignore that part of it and just assume there's only one. You really should not do that. So once we have an actual person, we want to update that person with information from the web. In order to do this, we're going to get the person's current URLs. In this case, we're only adding a URL to the person. We're going to get the URL from the person with AB record copy value. Then we're going to mutate that URL if we did get one. If we did not get one, we're going to create a new AB multi-value ref. And the way we do this is AB multi-value create mutable. The type is just what we're actually going to store in that multi-value. So once we have a mutable URLs multi-value, we're going to actually add the URL that was in that web person who downloaded from the web service. We have a handy little method on web person called URL string that just gives us a string. In this case, we wanted to put a label This is the label you're actually going to see displayed in the card. We're just going to call it social. Why not? You can call it whatever you want. All right, once we've done that, we have people from the web. We've updated our local contacts with that information. All we need to do now is to actually sort them. So I'm in this big for loop for every web person. At the end of that, I'm adding them to the array of people I have, and then I'm going to sort them. Whoops, sorry, I forgot something. I forgot what I told you should not forget. Once you've actually added the value and label, set that multi-value back on the AB record. And I'm actually intentionally going to skip the saving because I don't want to run it and destroy my address book contacts every time. So there we go. So you set back that mutable URLs onto the person. And then you have the updated person. Once we've done that, again, sorting. So we're going to sort, and this is the full version of it with all the casts. You have this beautiful NS integer star ID void star cast of AB person compare people by name. It's pretty. You just need to copy and paste it. It'll work fine. So we sort the people. Once we've done sorting, we need to actually display it.
That will be on the final exam.
The cast, yeah. You do. Anyone can say it. What was it? So this is because sort using function actually takes a sort of Objective-C centric version of the exact same CF version of it. So we need to cast.
Is that in the documentation?
Yes, yes. This is in the documentation. So this is in documentation for NSArray. This is nsarray.h. You have sort using function that takes in a pointer to a function that returns an NS integer and takes 2 arguments, ID void star. Going back to the table view controller. The reason you need to cast it is because AB person compare people by name is typically used for CF objects. So it's declared as taking lots of CF, AB record ref, which are all CF types. And they're not technically IDs, but they can be cast to IDs. That's why you need to actually do this casting. All right, back to displaying. I'm already creating here little silly cells that do nothing. So the table view self-forward index path. Again, this is my table view controller, so this is also the data source for the table view. So what I'm going to do here is actually get the person from our people for the particular row that I'm trying to display, get the composite name, and set that as the text. So once we have that, we're going to run it. And when it launches, we see that I have 2 people. If you remember, I showed you the web service. It actually returns 5 different people. But we're only displaying 2 here because we're only displaying the people that are also in my address book. If you look at the people in my address book, here I have John Appleseed, Kate, Anna, Daniel, David, Hank. I know all those people really well. So we have all those people. So now we actually also probably should display the other people that were available on the web service. So I'm going to go back to our array building people method. And here you see if we have matches, we're doing a whole lot of work. But if we didn't actually match anybody in the address book, we're not doing anything. That's probably wrong. So we're going to go ahead, and if we don't have a match, can I collapse this? Oh, that would be excellent. There. If we do not have a match, if we have a match, we did all the work we had earlier. If we don't have a match, we're going to create a new person. And this is how you create a person. AB person create. Oops, sorry. I'm jumping around a little too much. All right. Once we have that person, we actually need to give it a name, a last name, etc. So we're going to set the first name and the last name to be what came from the web service. Once we have that, we need to actually also set the URL, which was the interesting bit. So we create a mutable multi-value. This is very similar to the code we saw earlier. And we add the value and label, again with the social. We set that value back on the person. And once we're done with that, we release the multi-value because it's already been set on the person. So with that, we should actually be able to just run it again. And there we go. We have the 5 people that were on the web. All right. Let's go back. That's the end of that demo. Any questions? Are there any open source repositories that are available where we can copy and paste code to deal with address book? Address book is so self-explanatory. You really can just come up with all that code. we do have thank you. We do have a number of sample code available on the Apple's website, and there should be some for address book. We'll also be publishing that sample code, obviously.
Check to see wrapper at bugreport.com.
If you want a Objective-C wrapper API, then you can write it. It's a very common request that still hasn't been addressed, that Evan likes to remind me of. All right, so that was our little demo. So what did we just see? Again, the 3 steps: searching in the address book database, using the multi-values. It can be a little cumbersome. There's a bit of code, but it's fairly straightforward when you have your mind wrapped in the right way. So then you're just sorting and displaying. OK, this is a little cute, but we might want to show a little more information than just the name in a list. What about all this other stuff that we saw in the first demo? So we're actually going to do that. We're going to add little blue arrows to that list and actually display the entire card for those people. How are we going to do that? Again, that was the very first demo, AB person view controller. That's a view controller subclass that the address book UI framework is providing. There's 3 important properties. Displayed person, that's where you set the person. Displayed properties, you don't actually want to touch it. That's the list of actual properties that you want to display. If you don't leave it alone, it'll display all the properties. And then whether or not to allow editing. That was the little edit button. If you want your users to be allowed to change those contacts, then allow editing, and you'll get the entire editing UI in there. So that's good for the people who are in the local address book. What about the people who are not in the local address book? The people who are just on your website and that social networking site. You just download it. Well, you might want to let your users add them to address book. So we have a different view controller for that. As you can see on the photo on the left, can never get that right. As you can see on the photo on the left, you have this new card with create new contact and add to existing contact. You're probably familiar when you get a phone call from somebody who's not in your address book, you get something similar on the phone, etc. So I'm going to show you how to do this. It's a different view controller class, AB unknown person view controller. And again, 3 important methods on it. Displayed person allows adding to address book. If you don't set that, you're not going to get the 2 buttons at the bottom. And then delegate. The delegate is actually important. This is what it looks like. The unknown person view controller will tell you when it resolves a person to something in your address book. So if the user presses the add to contacts, whether the user decides to create a new contact or add it to an existing one, we're going to take the user through a number of steps and everything, editing, and eventually we're going to tell you, the delegate, hey, it's done. Now it's this person. So what does this actually look like when we add this? Promise it's going to be quick. All right, back to our little sample. Again, this is where we're at. We have this beautiful list of people with nothing. And you can do roughly nothing with it. Just view it. Oops, not what I wanted to do. No, I decline. I do not want you. All right, so what are we going to do? In order to do this, I said we're going to add little accessory views on the table. Oh, this is something from earlier. Never mind. Apparently, I'm leaking some memory. So we're going to add some accessory view. In this case, we're always going to add it. Accessory button tab for index row. Yeah, there we go. Oh, sorry. The accessory type is here. We're going to say that all the cells have a disclosure button. And then this is the method for when an accessory button gets tapped. So we're going to go ahead, when the accessory button is tapped, get the person from our people array. And this is an important little bit of code. We're trying to get the record ID. Each record in the address book has an ID. that's also an integer. It has an ID, and that will essentially tell you whether that contact is local or if that contact was just created. Again, in that people method earlier, in some cases, we're just creating people. Those people who are just created, not added to the database, not saved, do not have a record ID. This is a good way to figure out if this is a known person or an unknown person. So once we have that known person, we're going to create an AB person view controller, set the display person. We're going to allow editing, because why not? And then we're going to push that person onto the view controller, onto the navigation controller. All right, once we have that, we're going to run it. And now we have some of them work. Like this guy doesn't work. This one works. Excellent. So I'm going to go back and fix that, which I forgot. So we're doing it in case that person is known. We should also do something in case that person is not known. So we're going to go ahead, create an unknown person view controller, set the displayed person, set allows adding to address book, yes, and then push it on the stack. Additionally, you should probably also set the delegate, implement the delegate method, but I'm not going to cover that right now. So once we run this, save. Now we have Anna, still works, because she's local in my address book. I also have this URL that I added earlier. And I have Adrienne, who's not in my address book, but who's on my web service. And I can actually create a new contact, and will lead me through all. I can add his phone number, etc. So I can do all those things in here directly. And I can cancel if I don't want to actually add the contact. All right, so that was the displaying. Any questions on that little demo? All right. So what do we just see? Displaying contacts. If this is a contact that is in your address book, you probably want to use the AB person view controller. If this is a contact you want to let the user add to their address book, AB unknown person view controller. Those are the main differences between the two. This is something Evan mentioned, and Evan and Al mentioned in the previous classes. The question was, is there a way to let the user know before you start modifying their contacts? There's no built-in way to do this, but you can come up with a little UI to say, hey, do you want us to update your contacts? And I would highly recommend you do that before you start modifying the user's database. That would not be very nice. So you should probably pop a dialog, hey, do you want us to automatically update your contacts locally, etc. So, but there's no UI built in to do it. All right, so what if it takes too long? This is something Evan even mentioned just earlier today. Threading. How does that work? We're downloading things from a web service, so you probably want to do that in a thread on the side using an S operation or P threads if you like pain. So why am I talking about this? Well, this is important in the context of address book. In the context of address book, each thread needs to have its own address book instance. This goes back to this first example, AB address book create. You will create a new instance of the address book. All talk to the same database. But this is important because address book any instance of address book, or the record it gets, cannot be used on multiple threads at the same time. However, so the way to do it is to create multiple instances, do your thing, save that address book, and then the other address book can actually get that data from once address book 1 has been saved. The things that are okay to pass between threads are record IDs, because they're just integers, and any values you get from an address book. So the names, the phone numbers, etc., those are okay to get passed around. So I mentioned, oh, no, sorry. All right, so that was it for the social address book example. Any questions? No, excellent. I must have been clear, extremely clear. So this is the second example I mentioned earlier. A fairly quick little sample on something else you might want to do. What if you have interesting information you want to share with other people in your address book? So in this case, you have a cool link. You actually want to send an email with that link to your friends. So I'm going to show you how to easily just pop up a button, let the user pick a contact, and then send them an email. What it looks like in this beautiful sample application. Beautiful blue background with a big send email button when you press the send email and highlights. And then you can actually see the picker, and the user can press on a contact and actually pick an email address to send an email to. In order to do this, we have this navigation controller class called AB People Picker Navigation Controller. This is essentially the entire contacts application. It doesn't let you edit, but lets you pick and navigate the entire contacts, all the groups, etc. You have to implement the delegate, and the delegate has three little callbacks: cancellation, selection of a person, and selection of a particular value. And I'm actually going to just show you some code for this, because code speaks louder than words. No, not really. People picker. There we go. So I've already wrote the code. I'm cheating. So we have this little do send email function here. Here's the little app I'm going to show you. We have this send email button. When this send email button is pressed, we show the picker. And what this does, I'm going to go to the send email function in here. This is an outlet that was hooked up in IB. You can see, you can play with the sample code later. All we're doing is create an AB People Picker navigation controller, set ourselves as the delegate, set the displayed properties. This is something you might remember from the AB Person View controller. In this case, it's really important. We only want to send emails to an email address. So we're only going to display email addresses. So in order to set it, we create an NS array with numbers in it. In this case, the email property. All the properties in address book are numbers. That's how we decided to do it. So you set the display property to only display email addresses. And then you present that view controller modally. And what this does is what we just saw. When you press the send email button, we display it. Let me find someone with multiple email addresses. There we go. Apparently there's a URL in that email address, but it's an email address, I swear. So the question is whether the picker will actually show all the contacts or just the contacts with email addresses. It will actually show all the contacts. Let me find someone who doesn't have an email address. I don't know if there is anybody in there. Let me quit, go to contacts. David Taylor does not have an email address. So there we go. So send email, David Taylor does not have an email address, and it will show you no email addresses. Any other questions? All right. So where was I? Yes, we're displaying that people picker. That's all great. We also should probably implement the delegate methods. Again, the three delegate methods are cancellation, and then notification of a person being selected and a property being selected. So in this first one, the cancellation, all we really want to do is dismiss the modal view controller, right? We're showing it, press the cancel button, we just dismiss it. In the should continue after selecting person, there's quite a bit of code here, just because typically when you're going through contacts, if that person only has one email address, you don't really need to make your user go through the pain of actually selecting that one email address. If you can figure out there's only one email address, just send the email already. So that's what we're doing here. If we get the actual email addresses from that contact, check that there's only one. In that case, get that email address and do send the email. If that person does not have an email address, or if that person has more than one email address, we're going to just go ahead and continue. Again, the delegate methods actually should continue after selecting person. So if you return yes, it will actually show the card for that person. If you return no, it will do nothing. At which point you probably want to dismiss that modal view controller, which is what we're doing here. If we're done, I'm going to dismiss. If we're not done, then we're just going to say, no, go ahead, continue. And last but not least, this is the big method to when you get the final callback. The user has picked a particular email address. I'm not going to go over this in detail. You can take a closer look when you get the source code, and then send Evan and Al all the questions you have. All right. Any questions? Send them to Evan and Al. Back to. All right. So again, we just saw present the people picker modally, and then implement delegate callbacks. The cancel, the selection of a person, selection of an actual individual property. A couple more things I wanted to mention briefly. Storing people. In order to store people, how do you actually store it in your own database? If you've made a mapping between something on the web, something local, the way to do it is getting the record identifier. That's an integer. You can store it. When you come back, you can compare it to what is in the. When you come back, you can use that identifier to get the record from address book. This is what it looks like. You get the record ID. You serialize that, put it in the prefs, put it on a file in your database, wherever you want. When you come back, you deserialize it, get the integer value, which is the AB record ID, and then use this function, AB address book get person with record ID, to get the record. That's for storage. That's a very brief overview of how to store a person. There's one caveat to that, which is between the times you run, that person could be gone from the address book database. So before you actually try to get that person, try to display that person, you might want to check that it's still there. And if it is not there, you could actually store extra information, email addresses, things like that, to try to rematch them to somebody in the address book. The way this works, in order to check if they're still there, AB address book get person with record ID, just check that you actually got a record back, so it's not null. Any questions? So that's good if the database changed while you were gone, while you were between launches of your app. You can also get notifications when the database changes while your app is running. There's this AB address book register external change callback. You pass it a C function that will get called whenever the database changes externally. Then you have two options. Well, really, you have two things you can do, it should do. There's a first called AB address book revert that will get the changes from the address book, and then you should update your user interface. This is what it looks like. AB address book register external change callback. In this case, we're passing the address book, a function. We're passing a context. Self is just a context, a pointer to something. Can be whatever you want. And the function that we have, AB changed, gets a dictionary with information, as well as the context we passed in the first function call. In this case, the context is our recipe detail view controller. All demo left around. And we just reload the data. So fairly simple there. I mentioned you can revert. You don't have to revert. If you have changes, you probably don't want to. You probably want to save them. We'll try to merge the changes as best we can. Also, threading in change callbacks. If you have multiple address books, you can register for changes from the other address book. So if one address book saves, the other address book inside your own program will get that change notification. And it's all thread safe in that case. And this is a good way to exchange information between multiple threads and multiple address books, changing the actual database. And I believe that's all I had. So again, address book, two separate APIs, the address book framework, the address book UI framework, one C, one Objective-C. Again, toll-free bridge, you can mix and match them, mostly. Again, view controllers, address book provides, I think, 3 view controllers and 1 navigation controller. There's one I didn't talk about, which is the new person view controller, which is slightly different. It's mostly for when you want to create a contact, a whole new contact. And on that, any questions? Everyone got it. Excellent. Well, Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.